Hey everyone, and welcome back to the Deep Dive. Today we are going to be going deep on cryptocurrency and decentralization,
Yeah,
but not in the way that you're probably used to.
right.
We're going to be looking at some of the potential downsides.
Yeah, looking at the costs, the hidden costs that maybe people aren't really thinking about when they think about.
Yeah, and I think this will be really interesting for anyone who's been following this space for a while. You're probably hearing a lot of hype,
Yeah, tons of it.
and maybe you're starting to wonder, what are some of the things that people aren't talking about as much?
Yeah, what are we not seeing? What's kind of being swept under the rug?
Exactly. So for this deep dive, we're going to be looking at a presentation by David D. Clark.
Oh, yeah, he's a good one.
He's a legend. He's a pioneer in decentralized systems.
Yeah, one of the early internet pioneers, actually. So
Oh, wow. Yeah, so he knows this stuff.
he knows what he's talking about.
And he actually brings up some pretty shocking details.
Yeah.
I mean, I was blown away by some of the things he talked about.
Like what kind of stuff?
Well, for example, did you know that Bitcoin mining generates an insane amount of e-waste?
E-waste. Really?
Yeah, like
Yeah.
we're talking on par with a country like the Netherlands.
Oh, wow. That's a lot of waste.
It's crazy, right?
Yeah.
And then there's the whole connection between cryptocurrency and the rise of ransomware attacks.
Oh, yeah. That's a whole other can of worms.
And then he even shared this story about a group of ethical hackers who had to basically exploit Ethereum centralization to prevent a major theft.
So even though it's supposed to be decentralized, there are still these central points of failure that can be exploited.
Yeah, it's kind of a paradox.
It is definitely a paradox.
So yeah, lots to unpack today. But let's start at the beginning
Okay, sounds
with
great.
the whole idea of decentralization.
Right.
Because, I get the appeal, yeah, especially after the 2008 financial crisis.
Oh, yeah, absolutely.
People were understandably distrustful of institutions.
Right. They wanted to take control of their own finances.
Wow.
And, decentralization seems like the answer.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So how did this whole idea of decentralization actually come about? Like, what's the history there?
Well, David D. Clark, our expert for this deep dive, he actually got interested in decentralization through his work on digital preservation at Stanford Library.
Oh, interesting. So it wasn't even related to finance originally?
Not at all. He realized that decentralized systems were just more robust and resilient for storing and managing information long term.
So it's like that old saying, don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. He actually uses a great analogy in his presentation. He compares centralized systems to a single solid rod.
Okay.
If that rod breaks, the whole thing collapses, right? But decentralized systems are more like a cable made of many strands. If a few strands break, the cable still works, and you even get warnings before it fails completely.
That makes a lot of sense. So it seems like decentralization is a good thing, right?
Yeah.
Like more resilient, more robust.
Yeah, in theory it sounds great, but the problem is Bitcoin, which was designed to be decentralized, has ironically become more centralized over time.
Oh, wow. So the very thing it was trying to avoid it ended up becoming.
It's kind of a bummer, yeah.
So how did that happen? Like, what went wrong?
Well, it comes down to economics, really.
Okay.
You see, in Bitcoin mining, the bigger your operation, the lower your costs and the higher your profits.
Oh, so it's like economies of scale.
Exactly. And this leads to a consolidation of power where a handful of mining pools now control the majority of Bitcoin's mining power.
So it's like the rich get richer.
Pretty much, yeah. The system that was supposed to distribute power ended up concentrating it in the hands of a few.
That's pretty ironic.
Yeah, it's one of those unintended consequences that you often see with complex systems.
So it seems like decentralization in practice isn't always what it's cracked up to be.
Yeah, it's definitely something to be aware of.
Now, this brings us to another important point, the difference between permissioned and permissionless blockchain.
Oh yeah, that's a crucial distinction.
So can you break that down for us?
Sure, so permissioned blockchains, they have a central authority controlling who can participate and add blocks to the chain.
Okay, so it's kind of like a private club.
Exactly. You need permission to join.
I got it.
And these permissioned blockchains, they can use more efficient, less energy-intensive techniques like Byzantine fault tolerance to reach consensus.
Oh, wait.
It's a lot less resource-intensive than what we see with permissionless blockchains like Bitcoin.
So Bitcoin is an example of a permissionless blockchain.
Exactly. Anyone can join the network and participate in mining.
Okay, so it's more like a public park. Anyone can come in.
Yeah, that's a good analogy. But to achieve consensus without a central authority, they rely on this randomized, energy-intensive process called proof of work.
Ah, proof of work. That's where we get into the whole energy consumption issue, right?
Exactly. Miners are basically competing to solve complex math problems, and the winner gets to add the next block to the chain.
And that takes a lot of computing power.
A ton of computing power, and that's why it's so important to distinguish between permission and permissionless blockchains.
Right, because when people talk about blockchain, they often don't specify which one they're referring to.
Exactly. And it can be really misleading because they're fundamentally different.
Okay, so now I'm starting to get a clearer picture of how this all works. But I still have one question.
Shoot.
Why do these permissionless blockchains need cryptocurrency in the first place?
Ah, good question. So cryptocurrency serves two main purposes: incentives and security.
Okay.
It rewards miners for their efforts, and it protects against what's called a Sybil attack.
A Sybil attack. What's that?
It's basically where someone tries to take over a network by creating a ton of fake accounts to outvote everyone else.
Oh, wow. So cryptocurrency makes it expensive to participate in a permissionless blockchain, which deters these kinds of attacks.
Exactly. It raises the bar for entry.
That's pretty clever. So the
Hey.
cryptocurrency is like the fuel that keeps the system running.
Yeah, you could say that. But that fuel comes at a cost.
Right. We've already talked about the e-waste. But what about the energy consumption? Just how bad is it really?
It's pretty bad. Bitcoin alone consumes as much energy as a mid-sized country.
Seriously.
Yeah, around 117 terawatt hours per year.
That's insane. So we're essentially trading one problem, financial instability, for a whole set of new ones.
Well, it's not quite that simple, but yeah, the environmental cost of proof-of-work mining is a major concern.
Okay, so if proof of work is so energy intensive and wasteful, what are the alternatives?
Well, there are a couple of contenders, but they also come with their own set of challenges.
Of course, nothing's ever easy, is it?
Nope. One alternative is proof of space and time, which is used by a cryptocurrency called Chia.
Chia, I've heard of that.
Yeah, instead of wasting computation power, it aims to make participation expensive by requiring miners to have lots of storage space.
Also, instead of burning through energy, it's burning through hard drives.
Basically, yeah.
Hmm.
But it doesn't really solve the problem.
How so?
Well, when Chia launched, it actually led to a surge in hard drive purchases, which disrupted supply chains and created a different kind of e-waste.
Oh, wow. So it's like we're just shifting the problem around.
Yeah, it's a reminder that there are always unintended consequences to consider.
Okay, so maybe not the perfect solution. What about proof of stake? That's another one we hear about a lot.
Right. Proof of stake has its own set of issues. It basically says those with more cryptocurrency have more influence on the network.
So the rich get richer?
Yeah, pretty much.
Yeah.
It raises concerns about fairness and wealth inequality.
And doesn't it also have some technical challenges?
Oh, yeah. It's been really tricky to implement Ethereum. The second largest cryptocurrency has been trying to transition to proof of stake for a while now.
And how's that going?
Not very smoothly.
So it seems like there's no easy fix.
Nope. All these alternatives have their own downsides.
Well, this is certainly giving me a lot to think about. What else should we consider as we explore the potential downsides of cryptocurrency?
One thing that's often overlooked is that Bitcoin and many other cryptocurrencies are actually far more centralized than they appear.
Wait, I thought we already talked about that with the mining pools. How is it even more centralized?
It goes beyond the mining pools. A small number of miners control a large portion of the mining capacity, which increases both technical and legal risks.
Legal risks, what do you mean?
Well, in the eyes of U.S. law, mining pools become money transmitters because they choose which transactions go into the blocks they add to the blockchain.
Oh, I see.
This means they technically should be subject to regulations like anti-money laundering and know your customer rules.
But wouldn't that defeat the purpose of cryptocurrency?
Exactly, and that's the irony. The community often rejects regulations meant to restrict Bitcoin to legal uses, but that rejection actually leads to further centralization and undermines the very principles they claim to champion.
It's like a catch-22.
It really is.
So even though cryptocurrency aims to be decentralized, it ends up relying on these centralized entities like exchanges
Right.
and even something called Tether. What's Tether, by the way?
Tether is a stablecoin, which is basically a type of cryptocurrency that's pegged to the value of a traditional asset like the US dollar. It's supposed to provide stability in the volatile world of crypto, but there are concerns about its transparency and lack of proper regulation.
So it seems like despite its claims of decentralization, the cryptocurrency ecosystem still relies heavily on trust.
Yeah, and that trust is often misplaced.
Are there any other potential pitfalls we should be aware of before we move on?
We can't forget about the immutability of blockchain technology.
You mean the fact that transactions are permanent and can't be reversed? Isn't that a good thing?
It can be, but it's also a double-edged sword. If you make a mistake, there's no going back.
Oh, so your funds are gone and there's no safety net.
Exactly. And this immutability also makes smart contracts particularly vulnerable.
Smart contracts. I've heard that term thrown around, but I'm not entirely sure what they are.
They're basically self-executing contracts that are written in code.
Oh.
They automatically enforce the terms of an agreement. It's like having a digital lawyer built into the blockchain.
Oh, that sounds pretty cool.
Yeah, it sounds great in theory, but they're susceptible to coding errors and design flaws that hackers can exploit.
Oh, so even though they're supposed to be secure, they're still vulnerable.
Yeah, we've seen this happen time and time again with devastating financial losses.
Like, what kind of losses are we talking about?
Remember that $23 million fee Bitfinex accidentally paid for a $100,000 transaction?
Oh, yeah, I remember that story. That was crazy.
Or all those DeFi and NFT hacks that have cost people millions.
DeFi and NFTs. You're using a lot of acronyms here.
Sorry about that. DeFi stands for decentralized finance, which aims to recreate traditional financial systems like lending and borrowing on the blockchain without the need for banks. And NFTs are non-fungible tokens, which are basically unique digital assets that can represent anything from artwork to virtual real estate.
Oh, right. NFTs have become really popular.
Yeah, but they're also susceptible to hacks and scams.
So it seems like with all this complexity, there's a lot of room for things to go wrong.
You're telling me.
And we haven't even gotten into the issue of anonymity and its role in enabling criminal activity, especially ransomware attacks.
Oh, yeah, that's a whole other can of worms. We'll have to dive into that next time.
Sounds good. Let's take a quick break, and then we'll come back and explore the dark side of cryptocurrency.
Sounds good to me. I'm ready to go deep.
Yeah, so ransomware attacks are a huge problem these days.
Definitely seems like we're hearing about them more and more.
Yeah, and cryptocurrency has unfortunately made it a lot easier for these criminals to operate.
So how does that work? Like, why is cryptocurrency so appealing to ransomware attackers?
Well, for one, it's pretty easy to transfer cryptocurrency between, regulated and unregulated entities.
Okay.
Which makes it super hard to track, like trying to follow a trail of digital breadcrumbs that just disappear.
Right, like it's almost like it was designed for this kind of thing.
Yeah, and then there's the whole anonymity thing.
Right, because with Bitcoin, you can hide your identity, right?
Well, it's not that simple. You see, while Bitcoin does offer some degree of anonymity, it's not foolproof.
Like, all those transactions, they're recorded on the public blockchain. And with enough effort, you can often link those transactions to real-world identities.
So it's not truly anonymous then?
Not really. Plus, a lot of people end up using exchanges to buy things with Bitcoin.
Right, because not a lot of places accept it directly.
Exactly. And those exchanges, they require you to reveal your identity for those know your customer and anti-money laundering regulations.
So the anonymity kind of falls apart at that point.
Yeah, pretty much.
It seems like there are a lot of misconceptions about cryptocurrency out there.
Yeah, definitely.
So we've talked about the environmental impact, the centralization paradox, the security risks, and now how it's being used to fuel criminal activity.
It's a lot to take in.
It is. So for the average person out there, someone who's maybe thinking about investing in cryptocurrency,
Right.
what should they be aware of?
Well, I think the most important thing is to approach cryptocurrency with a healthy dose of skepticism
Okay.
and really understand the risks involved. It's not a get-rich-quick scheme.
Yeah, that's for sure.
And it's definitely not a risk-free investment.
So do your research understand the potential downsides?
Yeah, and consider the alternatives. There are other ways to invest your money.
Right. So don't put all your eggs in one basket.
Exactly. Diversify your portfolio.
Now, you mentioned alternatives to cryptocurrency.
Yeah.
So if decentralization is supposed to be this great thing, are there other paths we can explore?
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? Can we achieve the benefits of decentralization without all the negative consequences we've seen with cryptocurrency?
It's a tough one.
It is, but there are people out there working on it.
Like, what kind of things are they exploring?
Well, one area that's really interesting is distributed cooperative organizations or platform cooperatives.
Okay.
These are basically organizations that are owned and governed by their members.
Oh, this is like a more democratic approach.
Exactly. And they often draw inspiration from traditional cooperative principles, things like community ownership, democratic governance, social responsibility.
So it's not just about the technology, it's about the values behind it.
Right. It's about building a more equitable and sustainable world.
That's a really important point.
Yeah.
I think sometimes we get so caught up in the tech itself
Yeah.
that we forget about the human element.
The human element is crucial.
Absolutely.
Huh.
So it seems like there are alternative paths to decentralization
Yeah, there are definitely other ways to approach it.
that don't involve all the baggage that comes with cryptocurrency.
Right. It's about finding solutions that are more aligned with our values.
I like that. So as we continue to explore the world of decentralization, what are some key things to keep in mind?
Well, I think it's important to remember that this is a journey, not a destination.
Okay.
Decentralization is an ongoing process, and we're all still figuring it out.
Right. It's not like we're going to flip a switch and suddenly everything will be decentralized.
Exactly. It's going to take time, experimentation, and a lot of learning along the way.
And I think it's also important to be critical of the hype.
Oh, absolutely. There's a lot of hype in this space.
Yeah. And it's easy to get caught up in it.
It is. But we need to be discerning and ask tough questions.
Like what kind of questions?
Well, for example, who benefits from this technology?
Yeah.
What are the potential downsides?
Mm-hmm.
And are there alternative approaches that might be more beneficial for society as a whole?
Those are great questions. I think it's so easy to get swept up in the excitement of new technology
It is.
that we forget to step back and ask those critical questions.
Right. We need to be thoughtful and intentional about how we use technology.
So it's not just about the tech itself, it's about how we use it.
Exactly. Technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad.
So it's up to us to decide how we want to use it.
Right. It's about making conscious choices that align with our values.
I love that. So as we wrap up this deep dive into cryptocurrency and decentralization,
Yeah.
what are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that decentralization is a complex and multifaceted issue.
Okay.
There are no easy answers, and there are trade-offs to consider.
All right, there's no silver bullet.
Exactly. But I think it's important to keep exploring and experimenting.
Yeah, to keep asking those tough questions and challenging assumptions.
And to remember that the future is not predetermined. We have the power to shape it.
That's a really empowering thought. I think sometimes it feels like technology is just happening to us,
Yeah,
but we actually have a lot more agency than we realize.
absolutely. We can choose how we want to use technology, and we can work to create a future that is more aligned with our values.
Let's keep diving deep. Let's keep questioning, and let's keep working towards a better future.
To a better future.
It's amazing how much we just trust in our digital lives, right? Like we trust these systems, these companies with our money, our data, everything.
Yeah, it is kind of crazy when you think about it.
Like all this stuff runs on code that most of us don't understand.
Right, and companies that we barely know anything about.
But we just hand over our credit card info, our personal details without a second thought.
I know, we've just become so accustomed to it.
Right. And as we move towards this more decentralized world, that question of trust becomes even more crucial.
Yeah, because it's a fundamental shift in how we think about trust.
Like how so?
Well, traditionally, we've put our trust in these big institutions, right? Governments, banks, corporations.
Yeah, the powers that be.
Right. But decentralization kind of flips that on its head.
Okay.
Instead of blindly trusting these central authorities, we're distributing that trust across a network.
So it's more like a peer-to-peer system.
Exactly. It's about trusting the community, the code, the underlying technology.
And that requires a different way of thinking.
And totally. We need to become more discerning, more critical, more engaged in actually understanding these systems.
Because if we're going to be trusting these systems with our livelihoods,
Yeah.
we need to know how they work.
Exactly. We can't just blindly trust anymore.
And you know, it's funny because David D. Clark, he made this point in his presentation about how cryptocurrency, despite claiming to be trustless,
Right.
actually relies heavily on trust.
Yeah, he pointed out all those potential points of failure, like the mining pools, the exchanges, the software developers.
Right, and even the creators of those stablecoins like Tether.
Oh, yeah, Tether. That's a whole other can of worms.
It is. But you know, it's interesting how the community often rejects regulations that are meant to restrict Bitcoin to legal uses.
Right, they want to keep it decentralized and free from government interference.
But then they turn around and rely on these centralized entities like exchanges and Tether.
Yeah, it's kind of a contradiction.
It is. It's like they want to have their cake and eat it too.
It seems like it.
So this brings us back to that fundamental question. If decentralization is the goal, what are the alternatives to cryptocurrency?
Right. Can we build a better web, a more equitable and sustainable web, without relying on cryptocurrency?
Like what kind of alternatives are out there?
Well, there are these models like distributed cooperative organizations and platform cooperatives.
Right.
They're basically trying to decentralize ownership and governance without using blockchain technology or cryptocurrency.
So they're going back to the basics in a way.
Yeah, kind of. They're drawing inspiration from traditional cooperative principles.
Like what kind of principles?
Things like community ownership, democratic governance, social responsibility.
So it's not just about the tech, it's about the values behind it.
Exactly. It's about building a more equitable and sustainable world.
Okay, so let's talk about that for a second, because I think it's really important. We often get so caught up in the technology itself
Right.
that we forget about the human element.
Oh, absolutely. Technology is a tool, and like any tool, it can be used for good or bad.
So it's up to us to decide how we want to use it.
Exactly. We have a responsibility to make sure that technology is used in a way that benefits society as a whole.
And that aligns with our values.
Right. We need to be mindful of the impact that technology has on our lives and on the planet.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into cryptocurrency and decentralization, I'm curious to hear your thoughts. What are some key takeaways for our listeners?
Well, I think the biggest takeaway is that decentralization is a really complex issue. There are no easy answers, and there are definitely trade-offs to consider.
Right? There's no silver bullet.
Exactly. But I think it's important to keep exploring and experimenting.
To keep asking those tough questions and challenging those assumptions.
And to remember that the future is not predetermined. We have the power to shape it.
That's such a powerful thought. Because I think sometimes it feels like technology is just happening to us.
Yeah.
But we actually have a lot more agency than we realize.
We do. We can choose how we want to use technology, and we can work together to create a future that is more just and equitable.
So keep diving deep, keep questioning, keep exploring, and most importantly, keep believing in the power of collective action.
Couldn't have said it better myself. Thanks for having me on the show.
It was great having you. And thanks to all of you for joining us on this deep dive into the world of cryptocurrency and decentralization. Until next time, keep learning, keep questioning, and keep diving deep.